So that is really what's taking place here, is that the text is building up the Four Noble Truths, but using Sakhya, personal identity, in the place of the Noble Truth of suffering. So then comes the question, cessation of identity, cessation of identity. How, in other words, how does one stop this process of birth and death? And then Dhammadinna answers that it's the remainderless fading away, cessation, giving up, relinquishing, and so on, of that same craving. Basically, it's the same formula as the Third Noble Truth. And then the way leading to the cessation of identity, that is spoken of. What is the way leading to the cessation of identity? Spoken of by the Blessed One. And then Dhammadinna answers, it's the Noble Eightfold Path, from right view to right concentration. Okay, all of this is really just the formulas for the Four Noble Truths, now applied to the five aggregates as a composite whole. Okay, now we come to an extremely interesting and important question. Okay, we speak about the five aggregates here as being the five aggregates subject to clinging. So now Visakha asks, is that clinging the same as the five aggregates subject to clinging? Or is the clinging something apart from, something separate from the five aggregates subject to clinging? Okay, now we have the five aggregates, and what makes these five aggregates, why they're called dukkha, is because within them there is a clinging to them. And we have to find out what is meant by that clinging. That will come in the answer. Okay, so what is this clinging? Is it something the same as the five aggregates, or something apart from them? Then Dhammadinna answers, the clinging is neither the same as the five aggregates, nor is clinging something apart from the five aggregates subject to clinging. If clinging were the same as the five aggregates, that would mean that my body itself, the physical body, is just the process of clinging. That every feeling I undergo is a process or an act of clinging. Every perception that I have is an act of clinging. Every mental formation I have is an act of clinging. Every consciousness I have is an act of clinging. In that case, it's impossible to get rid of clinging. And if clinging was something separate from the five aggregates, then I could just have the five aggregates here, and my clinging would be something outside of the five aggregates, which seems nonsensical. But Dhammadinna answers that it is the desire and lust in regard to the five aggregates subject to clinging, that is the clinging there, that is the clinging to them. Now this desire and lust is actually part of one of the five aggregates. Which aggregate does it belong to? Take a guess.
Feeling.
No? I heard it back here someplace. Right, the sankhara aggregate, yeah, the aggregate of the volitional formations. So it fits into that, it's part of that aggregate, it's not identical with everything in that aggregate. But within the aggregate of volitional formations, one of the factors that fits into that aggregate is clinging. And so that clinging, you could say it's the hidden demon, or Mara, within the five aggregates, which clings to all of them. So it is through that desire and lust within the aggregate of volitional activities that we cling to the body or form, we cling to feelings, we cling to perceptions, we cling to other volitional activities, and we cling to consciousness.
Does the word clinging have any special meaning beyond a dictionary definition of being hanging on to?
Wait, use the microphone, it's coming by.
Does the word clinging have any meaning beyond, let's say, what a dictionary definition would be, which would mean to hang on to?
Okay, first I'll explain it etymologically, then I'll explain the most important form of clinging. Okay, etymologically, the word, don't need this anymore. This is my clinging, upadana. Yeah, the Pali word is upadana, which comes from sort of the stem is dana, which means giving. But when it gets the prefix a, it reverses the direction. So it becomes not giving, but taking. And then it has another prefix, upa, which gets blended with that a. So it means something like taking upon oneself, taking towards oneself. So that is the etymological derivation.
What is upa, please, Bhante, if you were to bring that up? What would upa mean?
Usually it means towards, in the direction of oneself.
Thank you.
But the way upadana functions in regard to the 5 aggregates, sort of the chief manifestation of upadana is taking the aggregates to be mine, what I am, or myself. And so the way in which we cling to these 5 aggregates, sort of the most deepest underlying way one clings to them is through, we can call this appropriation, which means taking them to be mine, holding to them, this is mine, my form, my feeling, my perception, my volitions, my consciousness. Or else identification, taking them to be what I am, and then when one builds up conceptually on the sense of I am, then one gets the view of a self. One or another of these 5 aggregates is myself, my real self.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
In the case of non-returner, they get rid of identity view already, but still have conceit.
Yeah.
So the conceit, does it cling on 5 aggregate or just cling on something? Just has to be something to cling on?
Yeah. The way I would put it, I would say that for the non-returner, there's still a clinging, but the clinging doesn't take the form of, it doesn't manifest in the form of the idea, this is myself, or this is what I am. But there's still a clinging to the 5 aggregates, but not identifying them so explicitly as mine, I am, or myself.
So still cling on the 5 aggregate,
Yeah,
but no, that is not, I am is not myself, it's not 5 aggregate.
yeah. It doesn't have those ideas anymore.
Okay, thanks.
One thing, just to clarify, a stream enterer has given up identity view, haven't they?
Yeah.
I just want to make that.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that, yeah.
Stream enterer, of course, let that go.
Okay, now the way I understand it, that the way this clinging operates This is my own personal theory, it's not in the text. That in different people, according to their temperaments, will tend to cling to different aggregates. And so you could see different personalities based on what type of clinging they have, like maybe the beauty queen, or the bodybuilder, you know, the champion He-Man. For them, the sense of self very strongly attached to the body. So the person who has a very strong sense of physical identification, that's the cling to the body as I am. And other people sort of wallow in their feelings, maybe the aesthetic type who likes to get uplifted by maybe beautiful music, or the poet carried away by waves of emotion. Well, we say emotion belongs to the aggregate of volitional formations, but just speaking loosely, we could say the person carried away by emotions, or sometimes a person who's carried, always wallowing in self-pity. Oh, I'm such a loser, do everything wrong. Or the person the sensualist who likes to enjoy sensual pleasures. That's the person that identifies with feeling. Then maybe the aesthetic person who likes to see beautiful paintings, has very keen aesthetic judgment. Or maybe, okay, that's the kind of person who works through perception, through the senses. And maybe people who like intellectual games, computer programmers, people who are designing new types of computers, work with perception through the mind perception. So that would be the person that identifies with perception. Then the so-called man of action, you know, the business person, the ambitious politician, the one who wants to change the world in his own image, to conquer the world, the military person. Maybe that's the person in whom identification with the aggregate of volitional activities is prominent. And who is the person that identifies with the aggregate of consciousness? Who?
Monk. Yeah, monk.
The monk. No, we don't identify with anything. Who?
Scientist.
She said scientist.
Scientist. Maybe. I was thinking of, could be philosopher.
Psychologist.
Carlos Castaneda.
It's been decades since I've read it. Okay, when a yogi, so these are some questions. When a yogi practices, this is a little bit technical, the kasina meditation, is it the mind consciousness rather than the eye consciousness that works with the object? Yeah, this is the light kasina where you're seeing kind of bright light and meditation. Yeah, this is the mind consciousness, it's not the eye consciousness. Again, this is a bit technical question. Is the craving that's responsible for the origin of identity directly tied to the asava? Are they equivalent? Let's say that if the asavas or the taints, the asava of sensual desire, the asava of craving for existence, would be included within the craving that's the origin of identity. Then, question, how do you not cling to consciousness? It's actually the same question can be asked about all 5 aggregates. How do you not cling to the aggregates? To do that, you have to develop insight meditation. by which one sees that the five aggregates are first impermanent, then because they're impermanent, they're unsatisfactory. Because they're impermanent and unsatisfactory, they're not mine, not I, not myself. Okay, so I just want to come back to this paragraph. So the clinging, it's not identical with all five aggregates. If it was identical with them, then we could never get rid of clinging. If clinging was separate from the five aggregates, again, it would have to exist in a realm of its own. So we would have our five aggregates here. Clinging would be something external to us. And again, we could never get rid of it because it would always be trailing us because it's separate from us. But the clinging is this desire and lust in the five aggregates, that is, in the fourth aggregate, which holds on to the other, to all five aggregates. And so by developing insight wisdom, it's possible to uproot this clinging. And when one uproots the clinging, then one has just the five aggregates, which are no longer subject to clinging. They're the five aggregates which are freed from clinging. And that's why the Buddha often speaks about the goal of his teaching as being the liberation of the mind through non-clinging. Yes?
You know, Jung's theory of personality types, I've been trying for some time to figure out the relationship between the aggregates and Jung's theory of personality types in volume 6 of his collected works. He has two forms of perception, namely intuition and sensation, two forms of judgment, feeling and thinking. And he has introversion and extroversion.
Yeah.
I think that the relationship is that he counts extroversion as, or it is pretty much what volition, what sankhara is to the Buddha, and the complete liberation from extroversion and liberation from clinging is what he calls introversion. And then the form, rupa, is, I think, sensation and consciousness, intuition, and feeling, vedana, right, and metta, and sana, perceptions, what he calls thinking.
Yeah.
I think that's how it works. And then what the Buddha is asking people to do is pretty much as Jung did, is to orient themselves from an introverted perspective rather than an extroverted one. And the idea of liberation is liberation from clinging to one's relationship to the world and one's dependence on one's perceptions and thoughts and all that kind of identification is basically the kind of identification that you grew up with in society, where you learn to be or think you are what other people think you are. Right? There's the extrovert itself that we have to deal with your persona, and people tend to fit into the roles that they're given. And so the position, I think, of both the Buddha and Jung is that the idea is to outgrow those imposed roles, which all fit with volition and extroversion.
Mm. Yeah, though I'm always a little bit wary about trying to push comparisons too far, because one always will come across points where the comparisons don't hold exactly. And of course, say in developing meditation, it's a kind of looking inward, so you could call it an introversion, but it's not a settling or taking something within oneself to be the self. That a normal introvert could also have a very strong problem of clinging.
But is the movement here from being I'm sorry. Is the movement here, the movement from clinging to non-clinging, is it a movement from being self-centered
Yes.
to becoming more externally centered? Or you understand what I'm saying? Like a child is very, very self-centered.
Yeah.
And as one gets older, one becomes less egocentric
Yeah.
and can see things from a different perspective.
Definitely it's a matter of becoming less self-centered, though it's not necessarily a matter of, say, becoming involved with a lot of other people in the sense of being sociable or gregarious.
No, it's a change in perception.
Yeah, yeah.
As opposed to, somebody would say,
Yeah.
one is culturally centric, and one only can see things from one's cultural point of view.
Yeah.
And then as you develop, you begin to see it in a different, in a more objective sense.
Yeah.
Rather than just from your own eyes or your own senses.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I think we'll end the discussion for the day here. Since we just started the sutta, I'm not going to have the discussion after lunch today, but we'll have, after we get through a substantial part of the sutta, then we can have the after lunch discussion, perhaps next week. But we'll continue with it next week. That's the 22nd. And then I'll have a class on the 29th. Originally I didn't have a class, but since we missed last week's class, we can reschedule for the 29th. So you see, this is quite a rich and quite deep sutta dealing with very important and interesting points. Okay, so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we share the merits with the devas, the nagas, the Buddhas, wishing them to rejoice, to protect the Buddha's teachings, to protect the world, to protect ourselves and others. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantam anumodikma shiram rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantam anumodikma shiram rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahedika punyanta nanumoditva shiram rakantu man param etavatacha amhehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavatacha amhehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe bhutanumodantu Sabba sampati siddhya etavatacha amhehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya bhavagupadaya vichihitato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha asanya sanino Tu kapamuchantu, pusantu niputin,